As I sit and think and research, I start to become increasingly convinced that Joe Biden may be the most successful and effective president of the last 50 years. Oh, David, no, that can't possibly be. Oh, this is going to be nonsense stuff. Well, let's actually think it through. As someone on the left, me, evaluating presidents going back to, I don't know, Nixon, Gerald Ford, when you actually go president by president and you look at Biden's accomplishments, it's difficult to argue that anyone has been more effective than Joe Biden, and he's not even done with his first term. Now, I know people will hear this and they'll say, David, this is a propaganda segment, or it's ideological, or you're doing this because you're scared. Do you really think that if I'm scared Trump's going to win, talking about Joe Biden on a left-leaning podcast is going to be the way to save Joe Biden? No, I'm talking about this because the more I think about it, the more it is where the facts lead me. So let's set the stage. Richard Nixon, psychopathic war criminal, right? I mean, liar, criminal, just insane. Nixon is not the best president of the last however many decades. Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon, which I believe was not the right thing to do, and generically forgettable as a president. Ford's not the most effective president of the last however many decades. Jimmy Carter, relatively ineffective. Some good environmental policies. I think he was right morally and ethically in a number of ways, but generally not the most effective president in terms of his accomplishments. Ronald Reagan deregulated everything he could find to deregulate, attacked the Environmental Protection Agency, tax cuts for the rich, arguably fueled China's rise, increased the national debt dramatically. Reagan's not the best president of the last many. George H.W. Bush, on foreign policy, a relatively widespread disaster. Illiberal politics, not a particularly memorable president, and ended up being a one-termer supplanted by Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, known for having a good economy, but I have to tell you, that was not really through Clinton's doing. Clinton benefited from circumstance and the dot-com boom, but he did a bunch of deregulation. He did a bunch of offshoring. He acted in ways that, again, strengthened China, probably to the detriment of the United States. So Clinton, a fine president in terms of the economic record, but that didn't have that much to do with Clinton. He benefited from circumstance. We then get to George W. Bush. War criminal, tax cuts for the rich, Afghanistan, Iraq disaster. Hard to say Bush was the most effective president. And then we get to Barack Obama. Barack Obama, who, again, presided over a solid economy. I do think Barack Obama deserves some credit, more than Clinton anyway, for presiding over a recovery from the Great Recession. But at the end of the day, fell short of the hope that had been exhibited during his presidential campaign. Not a bad president. I'm not saying he was a bad president, but we're talking about who has been the most effective. Okay, then we get Trump. I don't have to explain to you why Trump is not the best president of the last 50 years. So then we get to Joe Biden, and we start to look at the list of accomplishments. The American Rescue Plan, massive economic stimulus, yes, timed because of the pandemic and pandemic recovery, extraordinarily efficiently done, much less corrupt than the recovery packages that were done under Trump. Certainly an accomplishment. Inflation Reduction Act, which does so many different things with regard to the economy, where inflation is now coming down, combating climate change, lowering healthcare costs, reducing the deficit, provisions for clean energy investment. And we are now seeing one of the greatest aspects of that come to life, the drug price negotiations, where the Biden administration has now forced, essentially, Big Pharma to come to the table. The 10 of the widely most prescribed drugs under Medicare will now be negotiated, expecting at least 25% price cuts on those drugs, massively impactful to so many people. The CHIPS and Science Act, which will boost domestic semiconductor manufacturing, a huge issue in the supply chain problems that we started experiencing during the pandemic, will address a number of other supply chain issues that became evident during the pandemic. Technological advancements will be fomented, a major, major deal. The PACT Act, which expands healthcare benefits for veterans who were exposed to toxic substances, really important thing. Broadly, COVID response that made more sense than what we saw under Trump. Incredibly widespread vaccination campaign. Now we're in a different phase with the latest one. But when Biden took over, really had a disastrous infrastructure for vaccine distribution. Certainly another success. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Again, infrastructure spending, roads, bridges, public transit, airports, ports, broadband, and more. Already seeing some of that money allocated to really worthwhile projects. Going back to many of the international agreements that Trump, on a hissy fit, basically the equivalent of a toddler pooping in the sandbox before it's time to go home, the Biden administration rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, rejoining, restating, envisioning, recommitting to our commitments with the World Health Organization, and showing that, hey, we are not going to remain in this humiliating position in which Trump left us. Biden using executive actions on climate change in ways that I think are excellent, including when it comes to the Keystone XL pipeline, revoking the permit. I think that was the right decision. New climate targets, etc. Getting us out of, is it the longest war in American history in Afghanistan? Trump said he would do it and he didn't, and Biden did it. There was some chaos. There was going to be chaos no matter what, but Biden got us out, an extraordinary accomplishment. The American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan, which create jobs through investments in education and childcare, paid family leave. Not every aspect of that has made it into law as of yet, but certainly a worthy thing. And then you look at appointments and judicial nominations. An extraordinary number of judges confirmed. Trump would often brag, I'm getting so many judges confirmed. And he was right. Joe Biden, on a per year basis, has done even more, and that will shape the judiciary in an extremely important way. And then a bunch of other little things, a little expansion of the Affordable Care Act, which is going to make it so many more people will be able to get health insurance. Some little things on gun control legislation. Much of it doesn't have to do with the president, but he was able to do some things there. Enhancing background checks for buyers under 21, funding some mental health services, doing some school security. These are a lot of accomplishments. And then there's a whole other list of 50 things that I can't mention because I'd spend an hour reading them. This is pretty extraordinary stuff. And so this is not a defense of Biden's age or any. I'm simply looking at accomplishments. When I think back, Trump, Obama, George W. Bush, Clinton, George H.W., as we go back, it's really difficult to think of a more effective president than Joe Biden, and he still has 15 months left in his first term. If you disagree with me on the facts, let me know. If you plan to write to me and say, David, you're shilling for Biden, I don't even want to hear from you. And in fact, I don't even triage the emails anymore. So I won't, you'll be screaming into the void. Don't even bother. It's pointless stuff. But the more I look at it, the more impressive this record actually seems to me. Let me know your thoughts. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. We are in the final stretch to 2 million YouTube subscribers. So I wrote another book for kids. The first book was Think Like a Detective. The point of the first book was to teach kids critical thinking, which Republicans don't want them to learn, because when kids learn critical thinking, they don't vote for Republicans. The new book is Think Like a Scientist. This is a fun adventure teaching kids the scientific method. Again, Republicans aren't big on kids learning the scientific method because when they do, they're less likely to fall for Republican lies about climate change and vaccines and so many other things. You can get the new book as well as the first one at davidpakman.com/book. This is part of the Adventures in Thinking series. Can you imagine that we're doing this? We are. davidpakman.com/book. 13,500 copies of the first book have sold. I'll bring you an update soon on sales for the second book. Think like a scientist. davidpakman.com/book.